This is an introduction to writing your own classes, to creating objects in C++. Abstract data types, or ADTs, are user-defined types that are defined by two things, both the data type and the operational capabilities. So in other words, the data and basically what you can do with it. In C++, these are called classes. Classes define the data, which is called the data members, and the functions that manipulate the data, which are called member functions. So we use the word member there in both cases. We have data members and we have member functions. When you write your own class definition, there are basically two parts. There's the declaration section and the implementation section. In the declaration section, you declare the data members. These are usually private, so they can only be accessed by member functions. And you have the member function prototypes. These are usually public, so they can be called, for example, from the main function. In the implementation section is where you have the actual member function definitions. This is always going to include at least one constructor function that initializes the data members to begin with. The general form of a class definition looks like this. Again, we have the declaration section, and then we have the implementation section. So in the declaration section, we have the word class and then the class name, which is generally capitalized. That's just a rule of thumb. That's not an actual rule. Within that, inside of curly braces and a semicolon at the end, we have the private section in which we have the data member declarations, which look very much like variable declarations. And then under the public section, we have all of the member function prototypes for the member functions within this class. Then in the implementation section, we have all of the function definitions. This is going to include a constructor function. The constructor function header is class name, whatever the class name is, colon, colon, and then again, whatever the class name is. So in other words, the constructor function has the same name as the class. Also notice that there is no type in the beginning of the constructor function prototype, not even the word void, nothing, just the class name, colon, colon, class name, and then parameters in the body of the function. And then you have all of the other member functions, and they're going to have the form of the type of value that the function returns, or void if it doesn't return any value. And then you have the class name, colon, colon, and then the function name. That makes it part of the class. And the rest of it is just like any other function that you would write in C++. So that's the general form of a class definition. Here's an example of a time class. So we're going to declare a class called time. It's going to have 3 data members for hours, minutes, and seconds. And we're going to have 3 member functions, at least to begin with, in this class. The one called time is a constructor function. It has 3 parameters, all of which are integer. The int equals 0, what that does is that creates default values. So if you don't pass any values for the 3 integer parameters, it uses the defaults of zeros. And by the way, this is something you can do with functions, not just in classes. We also have 2 void functions, one called setTime, which has 3 integer parameters, and one called showTime, which doesn't have any parameters passed to it. So those are our 3 member function prototypes. So this is the declaration section. In the implementation section, we have the actual function definitions. So first of all, we have the constructor function. That has the same name as the class, which is time. So the header starts, again, not with any type, just the word time, colon, colon, time. We have 3 integer parameters, h, m, and s. And in the body of the function, what we're doing is storing the values that we pass to this time constructor function in the data members, hours, minutes, and seconds. Our second member function is named setTime. And to this, we also pass 3 integer values, h, m, and s, and we're taking those values and we're storing them in the data members, hours, minutes, and seconds. So if you look at these 2 functions, you might wonder, okay, what's the difference? We're passing 3 things, h, m, and s, and in each case, we're storing them in the data members. The difference between the constructor function time and the other member function setTime is in when and how the functions actually get called. The constructor function is called when you create an object to begin with. The setTime function can be called anytime after that, and anytime you want to change the values of data members. We'll see more of that when we look at the main function and how these are actually called. The rest of our implementation section is the function definition for the showtime function. This is going to display the hours, minutes, and seconds from a particular object, and rather than using the default of a blank space, we're going to have zeros as the fill character. So what we want is the format to be hours as two numbers. So if it's 7 o'clock, it might be 07, for example, colon the minutes, colon the seconds. So we set the fill character to 0, and we're displaying the hours, colon, minutes, colon, and seconds. Okay, so that was our implementation section. Then we would have the main function. So in the main function, what I'm doing first of all is I'm creating 3 objects named now, later, and whenever. This looks a lot like variable declarations, but what we're doing is we're instantiating objects named now, later, and whenever. So now, later, and whenever, these are all instances of the time class. So an object is an instance of the class. Now notice that with now, I'm not passing any arguments. Later, I'm passing 62345, and whenever, again, no arguments. So what does that mean, arguments? When you instantiate an object, automatically the constructor function is called in order to initialize the data members within that object. So with the now object, I'm not passing any values for the hours, minutes, and seconds, so it's going to use the defaults of zeros that we had in that constructor function prototype. So hours, minutes, and seconds will all be 0 for the object now. For later, I am passing 3 values. So 6 is the hours, 23 is the minutes, 45 is the seconds. So again, that automatically calls the constructor function and passes those values to the parameters. So it's storing those values in the data members of the object named later. Whenever, again, not passing any values when we call the constructor function, so that's automatically going to use the default values of zeros. So that's just creating or instantiating the objects. And then we could call the member functions. So we have 2 member functions that we've created, showtime that displays the hours, minutes, and seconds from a particular object, and setTime, which can be used to change the values of the hours, minutes, and seconds within a particular object. So the way you call a member function is you give the name of the object, dot or period, and then the name of the function, and then any arguments that you might need to pass to it. So the first case, I'm calling showtime with the whenever object. So notice that I'm not passing any arguments to the function, but I'm calling this showtime function with the whenever function. So in other words, in the body of showtime, when I refer to hours, minutes, and seconds, it's going to be the hours, minutes, and seconds of this particular object. Then I'm going to change the whenever object by calling the setTime function. So again, I call the function with the particular object, in this case with whenever, and I'm passing 45959. So in other words, I'm changing the values of the hours, minutes, and seconds of that object to be 4 hours, 59 minutes, 59 seconds. Then I'm going to display each of the objects using showtime. So I'm calling showtime with each of the objects, first now, and then later, and then whenever. So it's going to display the values that I currently have stored in each of those objects. So again, the difference between the constructor function and the setTime function is in when they get called. The constructor function is called automatically when you instantiate an object. The setTime function you can call whenever you want to in order to change the values that you have stored in the data members of a particular object.